The 1980s were very interesting years, not just for Calibishie or Dominica, but I think worldwide. And I'll explain why as we continue here on this Calibishie Chronicle feature. The 60s were marked by massive racial strife and tension in America. America had assumed global superpower with the ending of the Second World War, 1945. America came from colonialism under England, and England had ceded sort of the reign of superpower to a new emerging power. So England was, yes, powerful as an ally to America, but America was the nation that was calling the shots around the world. Dominica is in the Americas, and we were affected by what was taking place in North America, especially the racism. So coming into the 60s, it was an all-time high for tensions in America with JFK and Rosa Parks and Dr. King. Dr. King was killed for the activities towards equal rights and justice in America. So out of the 1960s came the 70s. And I see the 70s as the tumultuous 70s, because we are trying to fix a problem in the world, and Dominica is smack in the middle. Bob Marley from Jamaica would have come on the scene, and he was a revolutionary in terms of his voice, chanting from the Bible and putting some words of wisdom in the chant. So Bob Marley became an in thing. During that time, it was an incubation period for the Caribbean. And Caribbean writers came on the scene as well and started penning some big ideas and messages for Caribbean region. Rastafari also emerged. Ganja became part of the way of life, consciousness, and the levity. And eat what you grow and grow what you eat. All of this came through this in the 70s. So coming out of the 70s, the systems of the world wanted to recapture things. So the 1980s brought with it new ideas, new involvements, idea of spiritual conservatism, ideas of renewals, idea of cooperativism, and so on. And the politics and so started shifting in the 80s. So I'm talking from my understanding of the 80s. That's when I knew myself, although I'm a child of the 70s, but it was in the 80s I really start seeing life the way that life should be. And that is the perspective from which I am telling the stories on the Calibishie Chronicle. So the 80s really developed from what occurred before, because it is the past which determines the present, and it's the present that really shapes the future. So if we're going to have to see where we're going tomorrow, we must see where we came from. You cannot go back, but you can look back while you're moving forward in the spirit of Sankofa. So the 80s, I have set again a tone for the 80s, and why I think the 80s were the most interesting years, at least in the transformation of the world. So Dominica and Calibishie was part of that 80s swing, and I experienced life in the 80s. That's why different generations of people see things differently. The people who were brought up in the decade of the 20s, 2000, are going to think differently from me, because I was brought up in the 80s. Time of Bob Marley. I would have been a Rasta, as I said before, had I been a bit more advanced in age at the time to make my own choices. Biscuit, Edison George, and these guys who lived before me were different. I didn't understand them then, but now, years after Biscuit passed, I understand that Biscuit was a communist, and why he was a communist, because he came back from that era when communism was fighting against capitalism, and capitalism was seen as this demonic thing, and communism was seen as this demonic thing. So we're not in the era of the isms, ideology, and ideologue warfare anymore. We have changed. So you who live life now will not see life the way that I live life in the 80s. And we go back decades. That's why we have to find a marriage between the different experiences. That's why this Calibishie Chronicle story is so important for the future of our people, in terms of how we understand who we are, where we came from, and where we're going to go. So I'm going to speak a bit about the activities taking place in Calibishie again during the 80s, and I wanted to introduce another topic in terms of arts, entertainment, culture, music. And this is going to be an interesting part, because Calibishie was a bed of arts, entertainment, music, and culture. And Bristol had a disco in Calibishie that was the hub, the epicenter of activities, not just in Calibishie, in the Northeast. And before that, I can talk about the disco by Mayonnaise as well. So let's get into those discussions on the next few episodes.